Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. Before I get to the first question, remember in the last video in this series when I showed off my George Reeves Superman shirt? Well, I was talking to a friend of mine about my growing collection of Superman shirts, and this friend of mine who's known me for a while saw fit to challenge my cred as a Batman fan because I have so many Superman shirts now. So I made this little image for the benefit of this friend of mine, and I just want to show it to you guys as well, just in case any of you doubt my cred as a true Batman fan, just because I happen to own a lot of Superman shirts. I'm still down with Batman 100%. I'm a Batman fan from way back, so I dare anybody to fuck with me about being a Batman fan after seeing this picture, okay? Batman nerd for life, that's it. So now that that's been settled, the first question this week comes from Ohoyerno, who says, my fundamentalist co-worker recently let it slip that he might become a grandfather soon because his daughter is now 18. I could not hide my disgust. He said that condoms were sinful, so I simply said that I hope his wife is a better parent than him. It bothers me because he's rooting for his daughter's future to be destroyed. I'm not quick to call someone a bad parent, but this seems like really bad parenting. If I knew the girl personally, or if she was a friend of my daughter, I'd make sure she had a supply of contraceptives, but that's neither here nor there. How would you handle such a situation? I would handle the situation the same way it sounds like you're handling it, which is since you don't know this man's daughter yourself, or she's not acquainted with your daughter or whatever, it sounds like you're just going to sort of not do anything, but just quietly judge the shitty parenting of the father, which is the same thing I would do. I mean, his daughter, if his daughter is 18, then she's a grown-up, she's legally an adult, and if she decides to go out and be sexually active and have sex without using contraception or protection of any kind, she's not on the pill, the guy's not using a condom or whatever, that's her decision. And if she wants to get pregnant and vastly complicate her life and be faced with a pregnancy and having to raise a child starting at age 18, that's up to her. That's not what I would want for myself. That's not what I would want for my daughter. I don't think that's what this parent should want for his daughter. It just makes no sense to me at all why you would hope that your child becomes a parent at such a young age, whether it's your daughter or your son. I just don't see how that makes any sense at all. I think you're doing the right thing in saying to yourself, if I were in a situation to help, if I were in a situation to provide some guidance to this young woman, that you would do it, but it's not really anything you're involved in. And if I were you, I would be very glad that this was a situation that you did not have to be directly involved in, because it sounds like a mess. Crowbro, why do so many Americans think the answer to gun violence is to give more people guns? We tend to look at the gun issue in terms of, you even said it in your question, gun violence, which conjures images of homicides, of gun homicides, of people using guns to intentionally kill people or harm people or threaten people. And that is a huge part of the problem, and gun homicide and gun-related crime in the United States is a big, big, big problem, and is a bigger problem here than it is, for instance, in the UK or in Canada or Japan or numerous other countries where it's not nearly as much of a problem as it is here. But because we tend to frame the issue in terms of gun violence, and in terms of, especially when a terrible mass shooting happens, like happened at Pulse nightclub in Orlando recently, whenever a mass shooting like that happens and it becomes a national tragedy, that sort of galvanizes the conversation, and it encourages us to look at the issue in those terms, and to look at it as we need to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. We need to make it as difficult as possible for people, you know, who mean other people harm to get guns. It encourages people to say, well, if a bad guy has a gun, and if we give all the good guys guns, then the bad guys won't be able to use their guns anymore. And that's where that mentality of, well, just give more people guns and that'll fix it comes from. I've learned over the last few years that when a mass shooting like this happens, that is a great opportunity to once again start the conversation, to renew the push for gun control, for gun regulation. But in doing that, in pushing that reform, we have to remember to not only refer to gun-related crime, but gun deaths in total, which also includes accidental deaths and suicide, because that allows us to describe the problem as it truly is, in my opinion, and that is not just that guns are easy for criminals to get and guns are easy for irresponsible people to get, but that there are just too damn many guns, period. Timothy Mastic. Hi, Steve. In the wake of this week's terrible events, I've been in a lot of heated conversations with conservatives about how to improve the state of things. One common trope coming from some Christian friends was that while the Bible contains a lot of violence, the New Testament and Christ means that the Old Testament laws no longer apply, and this stands in contrast to Islam, which apparently all applies all of the time. Their argument was ultimately that Islam inherently fuels violence and hatred in ways that Christianity doesn't. I tried to point out the double standard, which led to the Christ rebuttal, and my argument about Judaism not having a Christ figure to rescind the violence of the Old Testament was pretty much ignored. They claimed that the true Islam follows 100% of the Quran, including the violent bits. That kind of Islamophobia doesn't sit well with me because it paints all Muslims with a single stroke, but I couldn't seem to come up with a convincing enough argument to convince them otherwise. What do you think? I don't know if I can tell you anything that would be convincing to the people you're having this argument with, but I would point out a few things. First of all, there's no such thing as true Islam. One of the most important lessons I have learned over the last few years about how to speak and think about Islam, especially as a non-Muslim, and I learned this lesson from Muslims and ex-Muslims who I have heard speak about these issues, is that it's a huge mistake to essentialize Islam, to talk about Islam as though it is a monolith, to say Islam does this or does that as though it's one thing. Just like Christianity, just like Judaism, just like any religion or any ideology really that has enough followers and enough diversity within its community, Islam is not one thing. There is not one type of Muslim. There are many, many, many schools of thought within Islam. There are many different sects within Islam, just as there are within Christianity and Judaism and many other religions. So to say Islam does this or Islam does that is really a meaningless sentence. What people mean when they say Islam encourages violence or Islam inherently leads to terrorism or whatever, what they're saying is Islam as they understand it, or their interpretation of Islam. They are privileging their interpretation, their reading of the faith, their opinion of what constitutes a true Muslim or a 100% Muslim, as though it is the correct version. And therefore more moderate Muslims, more liberal Muslims who interpret their faith in a way that they feel does not call them to violence or call them to be hostile toward people of other faiths, they're not doing it right. They're just not Muslim enough. And we see this criticism of Christians as well. And it gets on my nerves when I see people making this criticism of Christians as well. And I used to think this way, and I no longer think this way. When they say, well, yeah, there are liberal Christians, there are moderate Christians, but that's just because they don't take their religion very seriously. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's productive, and I don't think that's respectful of people, of other people and their beliefs. I don't think it's fair to say, well, you're only a liberal Christian or you're only a moderate Christian because you just don't take your faith very seriously. You're only a moderate Muslim because you don't take your faith very seriously. Not only is that disrespectful to the beliefs of those individuals or those groups, that you are disparaging by saying, well, you don't really understand your faith, or you're not really a believer because of your liberal stance or your moderate interpretation. You are granting the extremists, the fundamentalists, the privilege of being the true interpreters of their faith. And I just don't see what the point is of that, other than to demonize and vilify Islam and by extension Muslims in general. Patrick Dodds, Steve, I was on a political message board a week ago and someone made a point that I couldn't quite disagree with. Maybe you'd have better luck since I'm pretty sure you are smarter than me. That person basically posited that the groups that said that we shouldn't point fingers at the Islamic religion, despite the anti-gay rhetoric of the Quran and the Hadith for the Orlando massacre, are the same people who couldn't point fingers fast enough at the manosphere and the misogyny running through it after the murders committed by Elliot Rodger. This poster basically said that it was convenient left-wing doublethink. This poster also stated that if the Pulse shooter was a fundamentalist Christian, that Christianity as a whole would be bashed up and down by the left in response. Would you happen to have a stinging Shivesian rejoinder to that? I would say that I don't think it's an apt comparison to compare the manosphere with Islam. As I just said in the previous question, Islam is an incredibly diverse global community that includes people of a multitude of different beliefs. There are many different political opinions, there are many different social opinions, there are many different philosophical viewpoints, whereas the manosphere is a much smaller and much more narrowly defined group. The manosphere, as it is typically understood, is basically a den of misogyny and sexism and anti-feminism, and it's just a little sphere of hate and garbage. And that's all it is. I've asked for years, show me the good men's rights activists. Show me the reasonable ones. Show me the ones that aren't just bitter, resentful reactionaries to feminism or social justice in general. Show me those people. Show me that website. Show me that forum that I can go to and find the elusive, reasonable men's rights activists. I have never seen it. But I can point you to tons of places where there are reasonable, moderate, humane, compassionate Muslims and ex-Muslims who are speaking out against the homophobia in Muslim communities, who are speaking out in support of gay Muslims, of trans Muslims, who are speaking out in support of modernizing and liberalizing their Muslim communities, of making their Muslim communities more open, more inclusive. I can find numerous examples, both people known personally to me who come from those communities, who come from that background, who are doing that activism, and organizations within the Muslim community that are doing that work. And I don't see that in the manosphere. The manosphere to me is a complete loss, is just defined by anger and hatred and abuse and harassment and just bullshit. And the Muslim community, in its much broader diversity, yes, of course, the Muslim community contains some really awful people with some really, really awful backwards ideas about how the world should work. But it also includes people who are trying their damnedest to make that community better, to make it a more hospitable, more humane, more inclusive, more equitable place, and to make their faith a more modern and humane faith. Just as there are many Christians doing the same thing with their faith. So I don't think it's an apt comparison at all to say that the manosphere and Islam are the same thing, and if you attribute one to the manosphere, you must attribute the other to Islam. I just don't think that's a fair comparison at all. Joshua Soderlund. Why are the rights of prisoners and their rehabilitation such an unimportant issue to social justice compared to relative trivia like women in video games? There is virtually no discussion on this issue. Prison rape is considered a random bonus extra punishment to be laughed about. Outcomes for prisoners are terrible, but apparently society does not care anymore since they make a poor choice. Society hates reevaluating how severe punishment should be, but the question of what crime deserves what punishment is an essential ethical dilemma we're happy to ignore. Convicts in the U.S. have rights taken away beyond their sentence, such as being denied food stamps, welfare, and job opportunities. Their oppression simply doesn't matter to most people. To me, that's the true definition of oppression. Aren't these the people who desperately need advocacy, or at least more discussion? Ex-convicts have no powerful institutions on their side, no articles being written in their favor, and meet ostracism and deafening silence on their issues wherever they go. Perhaps it does not fit into your agenda. Perhaps it does not excite you personally. But the question needs to be asked. If people who claim to care about social justice will not stand up for the needs, rights, and best future of real human beings being dismissed by society, then who will stand up for them? Because at the moment, it appears nobody does. I think you're right to point out that this issue isn't talked about nearly as much as it needs to be. I don't think it's fair to say that nobody is standing up for the rights of prisoners or ex-convicts. I think that is not true. It's true that it is not discussed very much in social justice circles on the internet. It is not a hot topic of conversation at least not in the social justice circles that I frequent, and I would just have to plead guilty to that and admit that you're right, and that it is something that I think needs to be discussed a lot more often, and not just discussed, but acted on. You know, it's something that needs to be a subject of more activism. But to say that it is not discussed, or that there is no one speaking up for the interests of prisoners or former prisoners, I don't think that's true. The ACLU does work to ensure that prisoners are treated humanely, are given the best possible conditions. There are numerous other organizations that advocate for the rights of both people who are in prison and people who have been released from prison, to make sure that they have fair opportunities when they get out. You're 100% right that it's a shitty situation. You're 100% right that people who have been released from prison desperately need more advocacy, need more resources. You're absolutely right that it's difficult to get a job when you're released from prison, that it's difficult to make use of government services in many states. If you are released, after you're released from prison, there is just a huge stigma attached to people who have been convicted of a crime and sent to prison. And that's not fair, and that's not right. So I'm 100% with you on that. But I would encourage you not to be as discouraged about it as I think sometimes you might be, as you sound like you are from the tone of your question, because there are organizations out there that are just as interested in the welfare of prisoners and ex-prisoners as you seem to be. And I would encourage you, strongly encourage you, to seek them out. Will Mortimer, regarding the news that's come out about Michael Jackson concerning the items found in his home, and bearing in mind it's been reported that he paid out up to $200 million in hush money to cease investigations. If it was revealed beyond reasonable doubt that Jackson was guilty of sexual abuse towards children, would you be able to separate the man from his art? Or would you do as many people did when it came to Ian Watkins and the Lost Prophets and quit listening to his music? I'll put it this way. I have not felt like watching The Cosby Show for the last couple years because of the horrendous allegations made against Bill Cosby, and I doubt I will ever feel like watching The Cosby Show again, or at least I won't be able to enjoy it as I once did because of that black cloud that has been cast over it because of Mr. Cosby's probable actions. And I think it's the same thing for the Michael Jackson thing. I think what you're really asking is, would it ever come to a point where I would say, nope, I'm out? And I think it would. I mean, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing. I'm pretty good at separating the person from the art. But as I said, when I answered a question similar to this some time ago, but months ago in an earlier episode of this series, I mean, there are lines. You know what I mean? There is a point, I think, where you pass that point and you go, okay, I just can't. I'm done, you know. I can't compartmentalize anymore. I can't separate the person from the art anymore. I'm just out. And I think I'm getting to that point with Michael Jackson. So yeah, I mean, like I say, I haven't listened to any of his music for a while. Maybe I'll just let that ride, you know. And on that happy note, cue the thunderclap.
The lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
The insane pumpkin carver. Steve, if you had to vote for a Republican for president, would you go for a centrist like John Kasich or a more libertarian guy like Rand Paul? I wouldn't want to vote for either Kasich or Paul. I don't think either one of them is remotely acceptable as a candidate. But if I try to imagine myself as a Republican, I would not vote for Donald Trump, but I might vote for Gary Johnson. Now, the real me would never vote for Gary Johnson and would never vote for a Libertarian Party candidate. But if I were a Republican Steve might vote for Gary Johnson if forced to choose between Gary Johnson and fucking Donald Trump. Carlisle the Cinephile, what do you think the odds are that the R-rated extended cut of Batman vs. Superman will improve the film in any way? I do not think there is any significant chance that that will happen. When I saw Batman v Superman in the theater, my thought was not, oh, this would be much better if it were half an hour longer. Or this would be much better if it were even more violent. So no, I do not think the new R-rated Ultimate Edition will be an improvement. But I'm never going to know because I'm not going to fucking watch it. Tom McDonald, hey Steve, who is your favorite Superman? the incompatible George Reeves, or one of the inferior actors who vainly tried to play the role later? And how much of the great man's work in the role have you seen? As you may suspect, I have an opinion on this, having watched him play Superman on TV as a young kid and demanding my mom get me a red towel since a cape was too expensive. Well, first of all, my favorite Superman is Christopher Reeve. That's just like you, having grown up watching George Reeves. I grew up with Christopher Reeve in the movies as my Superman, so that is my Superman and always will be. But I am a huge admirer of George Reeves's take on the character. I have seen all of his work on the show. I have the entire series on DVD behind me. I've seen every episode of the George Reeves Superman show. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. So I'm a huge, huge George Reeves Superman fan, but if I had to pick, it would be Christopher Reeve. Santa's Revenge. Any favorite books? Yeah. Tattoo of her name. Here's a question. What are your thoughts on the word irregardless? I don't care. I don't get bent out of shape about it. I mean, I am an English major. I do have an English education, but I don't give a shit if people use the word irregardless. I'm not the grammar police. As long as you're articulate and making yourself understood in an intelligent, creative, way, I don't give a shit if you use the word irregardless. I know what you mean. I'm not going to get all bent out of shape about it. Kevin Logan, did you actually order that pizza? And if so, how awesome was it? No, Kevin, I did not order that pizza because I am a liar. I was lying last week when I said I was going to order that pizza. I never even intended to order it. It was all for show. Joshua Purvis. Hi, Steve. My question is, with the brand split in WWE, do you think the shows will be good again? Thanks, big fan. I enjoy your videos. I don't think the brand split is going to help anything, honestly. I don't think that is the problem with WWE shows. Their problem is much more fundamental. They are good at setups and terrible at payoffs. I mean, that's the basic problem with their storytelling. And I don't think a brand split is going to help that. A brand split is just a gimmick, and it's going to take more than a gimmick to fix the underlying problem that has made their product relatively bad for quite some time. McFly88, Steve, couple questions for you. What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? What becomes of the brokenhearted? What's the frequency, Kenneth? Can you feel the love tonight? Are you experienced? And most importantly, it's been bugging me since the 60s. Have you ever seen the rain? And who'll stop the rain? Well, see, I don't feel qualified to answer all of those questions. I honestly don't know the answer to most of them, but to those last two questions, yes, I have seen the rain. And who will stop the rain? The fifth dimension will stop the rain, because it is they who will let the sun shine in. Let the sun shine in. The sun. I apologize. I apologize. Harmful if eaten. Hello, Steve. I recently pulled a sickie at work so that I could go to a music festival. I've never done this before, and I really felt awful doing it, even though I dislike the job. My question is, have you ever done such a thing? How did it go? Did you feel bad about during or afterwards? Yes, I have done it. No, I did not feel bad about it during. I felt bad about it afterwards, because when I went back to work the next day, having called off with no notice, my boss required a doctor's excuse for me to come back to work. So I had to go to the doctor and make up an illness and pay for an office visit and get a doctor's note to go back to work. So I regretted it for having to go to a doctor that I didn't need to go see and pay for an office visit that I didn't need. But I got away with it, except for the money I paid for the office visit. Thunderwing88, what happened to Wrestling with Wrestling? I was hoping to get your and Doc's thoughts on Charlotte turning on her dad. Well, Wrestling with Wrestling has moved to Doc's channel, and Doc's YouTube channel is Boar's Head Bill, and I'll put it on the screen so you can see it. For the next few weeks, Wrestling with Wrestling will be Thursdays at 4 p.m. That's when the live show will be, and then it'll be archived on Doc's YouTube channel. I'm not doing it anymore because I just don't have time to host it myself anymore. So Doc is taking it over. I will not be on the show regularly, but I will drop in from time to time as a guest, so we can still talk wrestling every once in a while. But yes, that's what happened to Wrestling with Wrestling. It moved to Doc's channel, and Doc is now in charge of it. It's his baby, and I think he's going to do a great job and take it into some really awesome new directions. So that's what happened to Wrestling with Wrestling. Thank you for asking. Corey Donaldson, since they are making Star Wars spin-off films, what kind of Star Wars spin-off film would you like to see? I would like to see a film about the Battle of Tanab, in which Han and Lando talk about in Return of the Jedi. You know, I've never been big on the Star Wars expanded universe or the Star Wars spin-offs or anything like that. I'm curious to see Rogue One because the trailer makes it look good and the story seems really interesting. If they do it right, I think the young Han Solo movie could be good that's coming out in a few more years. But honestly, as a Star Wars fan, I've always been there for the trilogy, you know, for the main movies. I've never been into the cartoons. I've never been into the comics or the novels. I've never been an expanded universe guy at all. I've been there just for the trilogy, for the Skywalkers, for Vader, for, you know, Han Solo and Princess Leia, and that's it. So I don't really have any ideas for what would be a good Star Wars spin-off movie after Rogue One, or for more of the Star Wars anthology series. Do any of you folks watching have any ideas? Please let me know. Leave a comment. Let me know what your great idea is for a Star Wars spin-off movie, because I got nothing. I'm just happy to turn up in the theater every couple years to see the next episode, or the next spin-off, I guess I can say now, since they're doing those in the off years. So let me know what you guys think. And that's it for the questions. That's it. I'm almost done. The only thing I have left to do is to give a shout out to a very deserving, usually a YouTube channel, but in this case, the shout out is going to a podcast, and it's an awesome podcast. And I got the idea to give this awesome podcast the shout out this week because the subject of my 5 Things video earlier this week was contemporary Christian cinema, and it just so happens there's an awesome podcast that is all about people watching and making fun of contemporary Christian movies. It is the awesome podcast God Awful Movies. God Awful Movies is hosted by Eli Bosnick and Heath Enright and No Illusion. It's a hilarious podcast. It is so much fun to listen to. If you are not listening to God Awful Movies, you should be. If you enjoyed my most recent 5 ungodly things about contemporary Christian cinema, if you thought that was funny, if you've enjoyed the episodes of Seth Andrews' Thinking Atheist podcast, where he has talked about contemporary Christian movies or contemporary Christian music or that sort of thing, if you think that whole area is just ripe for comedy and humor and satire, then you should totally be checking out God Awful Movies, because it is awesome. So you can go to their website, which is linked in the description of this video, listen to their most recent episode, listen to all their previous episodes. It's an awesome podcast. Check it out. I was fortunate enough to run into Eli very briefly at the Reason Rally. He's an awesome guy. It's an awesome show, and I highly recommend that you check out God Awful Movies. Give it a listen. I don't think you'll be sorry. And since I'm talking about podcasts anyway, I might as well remind you that you can also check out the Lemme Listen family of podcasts. This includes awesome podcasts such as Lemme Finish, American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, Cinema Shack, and, most importantly for my purposes here, because I'm a selfish egomaniac, Late Seating, which is a movie review podcast that Jason Harding, the grand poobah of Lemme Listen podcasts, co-hosts with me. Every couple of weeks, we bring out a new episode. We watch a classic film, one that has a reputation for being incredibly good or incredibly bad. We give it a fresh review. We make fun of it. We summarize it, and we decide whether or not this movie deserves its reputation. Does it deserve to be hailed as a classic or reviled as a notorious bomb? We decide, and we share it with you for your entertainment. And just today, going up live today as you watch this video on Friday, our brand new episode of Late Seating is going to be our review of that classic biblical epic from the 1950s, the last film ever made by the legendary Cecil B. DeMille, The 10 Commandments, starring Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner, and a cast of thousands. Yul Brynner? No, Yul Brynner. And a cast of thousands. So you can listen to our most recent episode of Late Seating. You can listen to all of the past episodes of Late Seating and all of the episodes of all of the excellent Lemme Listen podcasts by going to LemmeListenPodcast.com. And I really, really hope that you do. That's it for me, everybody. I am done. I am through. I am out of here. Please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. in the next video. So until the next video, take care, everybody. Hey folks, one more thing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.